Winter can be a really tricky time for plant parents, and I know how stressful it can be when you end up getting problems due to the winter months. Yellowing leaves, pests, overwatering, root rot, all these things can affect our plants with there being less light and the temperatures being lower. So yeah, in today's video I'm going to be giving you some tips on how you can get your plants through the winter. So the first thing we're going to talk about is light. Light is really important, and it's important to be aware of the seasons and how that changes your lighting situation. So for example, there might be somewhere you usually keep your plant during the summer months when there's plenty of light there that isn't getting quite as much light once the autumn winter months come in. So what I really like to do when the seasons change is I will reevaluate where my plants are situated, and if I think the plant is not getting enough light now that it's much darker in that spot than it was during the spring summer months, I will move that plant either closer to a window, or if you don't have a window that you can move your plant closer to, you can also use grow lights too. Grow lights are a great way to get plants through the winter and provide that extra light that maybe you don't have naturally, because we don't all have huge amounts of natural light in our apartments, in our houses, wherever we live. So grow lights can be a great way of doing that, but if you do have windows that you usually keep your plants back from a little bit more during the spring summer because they may get burned, it may now be okay to move them closer to that window just for the winter months, because the sun is not as strong during the autumn winter months. So definitely be aware of light, because yeah, light changes quite drastically when the seasons change, and I definitely notice it. And so I've learned to kind of go around, have a look at all my plants, and yeah, just reevaluate where they are and whether they need a little bit more light. So next we are going to talk about watering, and this is super important. Now I know some of us are really aware of this, but just in case you aren't aware of this, maybe you've just started getting into plants, you're a beginner, or you're just not aware, but you do actually have to change the way you water your plants when you go into the cooler months. And this is because how often we water our plants, it depends on two things. It depends on how much light they're getting, and it depends on the temperature, or three things I should say. It also depends on the potting medium that you have your plants in too, how fast that potting medium dries out, how much water it retains. But we're just going to talk about light and temperature for the purpose of this video. These are the things that change with the seasons. So when there's less light and the temperatures go down, your plant is going to take much longer to dry out. Another factor is that many of our plants tend to kind of slow down in their growth during the winter months. Some of them will stop growing altogether, others will slow down. But this means that your plant is not using as many nutrients, and so that's another reason that the soil takes a little bit longer to dry out. So it's really important to be aware of that. For example, if you have a plant that say you have to water every 2 to 3 days in the really hot summer months when it's really warm and there's a lot of sun, that's going to change for sure. So what I would say is you can either test the soil by putting your finger into the soil, that's the easiest way, or I use a moisture meter. I'll put a link in the description to the one that I use. That's another way you can test the soil, but just be aware that how often you're watering during the warmer months is going to change. So what I tend to do is I will always check the soil and make sure that it dries out if appropriate to the type of plant that I'm watering, because in my experience the perfect recipe for root rot is darker days, too much watering. If your plant is sat in a much darker area, that it usually gets more light, and it's also got really wet soil for this time when it's in that darker spot. This is the perfect kind of recipe for root rot, and I've lost plants to this before, so this year I'm being super careful. And to be honest with you, it can happen really easily, even if you think you're being quite vigilant. So I would definitely check your soil before watering. So another thing we need to talk about, I'm afraid, is pests. Now you may find that you are seeing fewer thrips in your collection during the colder months, because thrips, they just really love the warmer temperatures. You may still get thrips though, so do keep an eye out for them, but personally in my conditions I find that I don't get as many thrips during the winter. But you can't relax because this is basically spider mite season, and yeah, spider mites absolutely love this time of year for some reason. I always see them coming out in kind of October time. That's when I start to see them on my plants. And so yeah, you can't rest when it comes to pests. Pest control is kind of a permanent thing that you always have to do with plants. And the way I look at it is, instead of treating pests when I see them, I just keep my pest control kind of routine all the time. So all year round, and my routine that I'm about to explain to you, I do this also in the summer too. So I basically just employ the same techniques all year round, but I never stop basically. So yeah, I'm afraid pests are just one of those things we get on plants, and it's best to just accept it. But it's much easier, in my experience, to prevent pests and to have a kind of a preventative routine that you practice regularly rather than waiting until there's a pest infestation. And this tends to keep pests down. So the first thing I do is if the plant needs watering, I will put it in the shower and I will give it a good shower down with just plain water. Or the other thing I will do as well is I might spray it with insecticidal soap, making sure I cover both the fronts of the leaves and the backs of the leaves. And yeah, I only do that when the plant needs watering, but I do it every single time. So what I would recommend doing is combining your watering with pest control. Every time you water, do some pest control at the same time. Now, the other thing you can do as well, which I also do, is in between waterings when a plant doesn't need watering, is I will still practice pest prevention, but so as not to overwater the plant, I will take a microfiber cloth, I will spray on insecticidal soap to the cloth, and then I will wipe the fronts and the backs of the leaves as well in between waterings. So that way I can keep on top of my pest control, but I don't have to worry about overwatering. And insecticidal soap is a really good option. You can either make your own, or you can even just buy some if you like, whatever suits you really. And I would just really make a routine of doing this, as I say, at least every time you water, more often if you can manage it. And this is just a really good prevention routine for keeping pests away. I find that it really keeps the population down, and yeah, I don't wait until I see pests to do this either. I just do it all the time, and I'd really recommend that you do this as often as you possibly can. But as I said, just be really careful about overwatering. So if your plant doesn't need water, don't go spraying it down with a shower, because that would cause root rot. So you kind of get into a little bit of a routine of doing that each time. And I know some people find it a bit boring doing that, but the way I've tried to look at it is it's kind of a nice time when I can spend time with my plants. I can get kind of used to my plant, bond with it a bit more. I know that sounds a bit kind of hippie-ish, but I kind of bond with my plants when I clean them and take care of them. So I see it more like that rather than seeing it as a chore, so to speak. So yeah, just try to kind of maybe change your outlook, your perspective on plant care. Maybe see it as a chilled out thing. Put some nice music on that you like, put some YouTube videos on from creators like me, whatever it is that you like to do whilst you clean your plants, and just turn it into something nice. That's what I do. The next thing I'm going to talk about is repotting. Now, I personally do not like to repot during the colder months. This is just because plants that are not in active growth, and when the temperatures are lower, when there's less light around, they're just more likely to suffer with issues like a transplant shock. The roots aren't necessarily going to grow as quickly to recover. So it's just better, in my opinion, to repot during spring, summer, because this is a really optimum time for when you can repot your plants, because they're in active growth. Their roots are going to recover much more quickly. And there are just going to be less issues for you if you do it during the spring, summer months. Having said that, if you've got an emergency, like, I don't know, you found that a plant has root rot or it's really suffering for some reason, then I would go ahead and repot in that situation, but I wouldn't kind of do my yearly routine repots is what I'm saying. I will try to time those for a time when the plant is in active growth, the temperatures are nice and warm and there's plenty of light so they can recover more easily. Another tip I would give you is to be aware of where you are putting your heating on. Obviously during the warmer months we don't use our heating, so during the winter months when it's cold we're more likely to put our heaters on to keep the place warm. Just be a little bit aware that some plants can be sensitive to being near to the heaters when they're on, when they're active. Some plants might suffer with some browning or some problems like that. It really depends on the plant though. I find some plants can tolerate it pretty well. Some of the more hardy plants I mean, but yeah, there's definitely some plants that tend to get a little bit fussy about that, so definitely just keep your eye on it basically. If you've got plants that are near to a heater that wasn't active before, just keep an eye and check that they aren't having problems as a result. And another thing to be aware of with heating is that it may cause your soil to dry out quicker, and it also may cause your soil to dry out at the top quicker, and you might think it's time for a drink, but definitely check the soil deeper down as well, because sometimes central heating can cause the top of the soil to dry out quicker, and it may lead you to thinking your plant needs water, but deeper down in the pot possibly there might be still some moisture down there. So check deep down into your pot as well, don't just check the very kind of the shallow top of your pot. So yeah, just be aware of that heating can affect your plants in different ways. There are certain plants that just really do not like temperature fluctuations, so that heating coming on and off, it might be a problem for some plants, so definitely keep an eye on it. Another aspect of having your central heating on is that dry air is a really optimal condition for spider mites. Spider mites love dry conditions, and so our heating tends to dry out our air. And yeah, spider mites just absolutely love it. So again, keep on top of that pest prevention. Don't wait until you have an infestation. Just do it all year round and keep those leaves really nice and clean, and yeah, employ that insecticidal soap as often as you can, as I said in the pest segment. So those are my main winter tips that I can think of right now. And if you have any more tips, of course, if there's anything you'd like to add, do add them down below, as I'm sure we'd all like to get more tips on how to get our plants through the winter. Some of the things that our plants can suffer with during winter, aside from, of course, pests and root rot, sometimes you might get more yellowing of your plant's leaves, and it's not always a sign of a problem. You may notice more yellowing, particularly at the lower half of your plant during the winter months. So unless it's a real rapid yellowing and you've got a lot of leaves yellowing at once, that could point to root rot. If it's just something a little bit less though, and you're getting a little bit more of the yellowing on the lower leaves, don't worry too much, because I find that does tend to happen. Some plants will lose a few more of their lower leaves, but they always tend to recover then a little bit more in spring. One thing you can do to prevent that is just make sure, like I said, to get your plant nearer to light and make sure it gets a decent amount of light, because lower light situations due to the darker months, this is a time when your plant could start yellowing because it's not getting enough light. So if you pay attention to all the things I've kind of mentioned in this video, you should have a better time of winter with your plants. But just remember that if you do have plants that don't make it through the winter, don't be hard on yourself. It's going to happen to all of us, and it does happen to all of us. And yeah, sometimes they just do have problems and they perish, and sometimes I'll have a plant that I've gone to so much effort with and I've made sure I've done all the right things, and it will still get root rot or something. And in those situations, you can only do your best for your plants. If they're going to perish anyway, then I would say just don't stress yourself out about it. Don't feel bad. Sometimes we have winter casualties. They're going to happen. They will happen to me. Even though I'm trying to make sure I care for my plants, they're still going to happen. So yeah, don't feel bad if you lose a few plants over winter, or if you have a few plants that come out of winter looking a little bit scraggly or something. It's fine, it happens to us all. It doesn't make you a bad plant parent or anything like that, so don't worry. So yeah, I hope you found this helpful, and as I said before, definitely leave your tips in the comments if you have any extra tips, because I probably didn't cover everything here, but I've just kind of covered the basics. And yeah, I will see you in the next video. Take care.